Right, very warm welcome. This is the Open DiscourseNet seminar in London, supposedly. We are online and international, so we're going to wait a minute or so until everyone has joined, and then we will get started. You might not be able to activate your microphones and cameras just yet, but we will do this after the talk part, so you can then activate your camera and microphones and ask questions and participate in the discussion. Okay, my clock says 1 o'clock. Benno is here actually, which is good. Let's get started. Stephanie, do you want to sort of kick us off?
Yes. I'll extend a warm welcome to everyone to our seminar today. If you've attended the seminar with us before, you know that at the beginning of all of them, we advertise DiscourseNet as a network of scholars from around the world who are interested in discourse studies. We organize seminar series, conferences, and if you join as a member, you have access to all of this and can attend them for free. I'll pop our website link in the chat so you can see what other talks we have coming up, but also so you have access to the network and you can see what other groups there are if you're interested. And just a bit of housekeeping for today before we start the talk. As always, we aim for a presentation time from 30 to 40 minutes, and afterwards we have time for a Q&A. For that time, you can raise your hand, you can send a message to the chat to ask a question that you'd like. This is recorded, so if you would not like to be on the video, you can send a message in the chat, because we will upload the presentation, not the Q&A, onto our website so that people who couldn't attend today still watch the talk. So now I'll hand over to Michael, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Yes, it is my great pleasure to welcome, and excuse my mock Polish, to welcome Dariusz Galasinski, who is a professor in Wrocław at the Center for Interdisciplinary Research into Health and Illness. Dariusz has worked widely in discourse studies on suicide and suicide notes and child forced laborers. Regrets EU nurses are the keywords that come up on his blog. But today he's going to talk about wine and discourses of wine. So a very warm welcome. We are glad to have you, and I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, and I will now try my best to I can see my presentation. I hope that you can see it as well. All right. So again, thank you very much. And I'm going to talk about tasting notes. For some of you interested in wine, you will probably recognize tasting notes as just about the default way of writing about wine. But before I do, I'll tell you a little bit about the language of wine. There is surprisingly much, and at the same time surprisingly little on the language of wine. There are some classical studies, for example, by Adrian Lehrer, and recently a book on representing wine by colleagues in Spain. And there are probably now classical studies, and to a considerable extent, that is about it insofar as a kind of major studies on the language of wine in English, because I know that there are studies in other languages. But there is a very significant writing on wine language within the industry, and kind of people in the industry are concerned about kind of exclusion in language, because we use they use the words like palate or nose, where they actually don't mean the palate or the nose. quite a number of people are also advocating dumbing down the language, so they are understood by kind of wine oiks like me. Invariably, those studies are about the vocabulary. And of course, there are other studies, for example, in a kind of psychological lexical correlates with sensory perceptions and vocabulary in marketing, etc. But these are probably tangential to what I am interested in. What I want to do is I want to actually do a kind of larger studies on how wine is communicated about, and both by professionals, and those studies that I mentioned are mostly kind of examining the language of the professionals, but I'm also interested in kind of wine consumers, and I want to focus on tasting notes, textbook scoring, and wine purchase practices, for example. But today I want to tell you a little bit about writer certainty, and the interest in it is came from kind of realization when I was a subscriber to a very well-known wine magazine. I was reading the accounts of the wines of the year, and I was really surprised by the tasting notes, which are written almost like writing about laws of physics, kind of very much kind of this wine is, and adjective, 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 full stop, and sometimes even without the is. And this is what I'm going to talk about. I suppose I don't need to kind of do an introduction to discourse analysis. I come from critical discourse studies, although I must admit that my secret love is still critical linguistics, which kind of came before CDA. We can talk about it if you wish later. Now, I'm interested in modality, because modality is this phenomenon in language that is to do with writer's certainty, and the relationship the writer or the speaker on the one hand sets up with their text, but also with the addressee. And there are two kinds of modality. There is epistemic modality and there is deontic modality. And here I'm interested in epistemic modality. So it's this capacity of texts or clauses to express speaker certainty and express the kind of commitment to the truth of what is being said. And it's worth saying that at the most certain, the language is in the third person, whether singular or plural, and without any qualification. So it's kind of statements like "God exists" or "there are lions in Africa," which render the speaker at their most certain. The moment you actually say, "I'm sure," for example, there are lions in Africa, you're actually not as certain as without it. And epistemic modality has, of course, social functions, and it is about power and authority, in language, which are perhaps quite obvious things. And there is the kind of commitment and responsibility of the speaker, who sometimes is hidden. And we've got this kind of low modality from kind of possibly might, and high modality I know or I am sure. Now, I'm interested, as I said, in tasting notes, and this kind of creates immediately a problem. You know, the problem is where you get tasting notes. Some of you who are wine aficionados will know that there are actually probably hundreds of websites for for people interested in wine. They are subscription-based websites where you will have access to literally thousands of tasting notes. Jancis Robinson, one of the most famous wine critics in the world, who set up her website called jancisrobinson.com, in an interview claimed or said, I mean, I have no reason to doubt this, that there are 250,000 tasting notes on their website. The problem for me is that actually takes quite a lot of commitment to get access to those tasting notes. So I thought that it would be more interesting and perhaps more apt to take tasting notes from online shops, because these are the tasting notes that someone, meaning the shop, kind of decided that they would be useful for the wine purchaser to have access to. Rather than kind of putting the onus on the kind of committed winemaker, wine aficionado, I kind of thought that perhaps it would be more interesting, as I say, to kind of take tasting notes that are actually proposed to the wine lover or wine buyer. And indeed, this is what I have done. And there is another immediately problem, because I wanted to focus on the largest online shops in Europe, because I wanted the tasting notes that are kind of at least that are thought to be accessible cross-culturally across Europe, rather than only in Britain, for example, or only in France. But such data, I'm sure they are available, but they are not available for free, and I haven't been able actually to access. I wrote to a number of wine journalists, and they told me that that actually things are kind of way more complicated, because I mean, online shops very often have a stationary counterpart. For example, you can do online shopping with Tesco's, for example, but obviously Tesco's has also stationary shops. So how do you actually count the kind of online Tesco's? Is it larger than only an online outlet or not? So I basically started collecting tasting notes from a number of online wine shops that are available throughout Europe, that are explicitly available throughout Europe. So, for example, the 8 wines in Czechia will have a version in English, which is not only in Czech, for example, or the Avenue de Vin in France will also have a version in English rather than only in French. A number of German shops, even though they are actually available to customers in the European Union, they only have a German version, and I decided to discount such shops. And then, of course, I started thinking, okay, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tasting notes in them, and it's very easy to just drown in them. So I thought that I would collect only those tasting notes that are presented. There are presented in wines which are featured on their on their starting page, in order to whittle down the amount of data, but also as a kind of, I assume that these kind of feature wines, there will be some care taken as to what kind of tasting notes will be provided. So this is an account, and if someone has a better idea how to do it, I would actually welcome this, because I'm still struggling with it, whether it makes sense what I've just said in terms of the kind of data collection. Now, I'm going to show you 3 things. I'm going to show you, first of all, that certainty in tasting notes is done in 2 ways. There is a kind of syntactic way and non-syntactic way. I am going to tell you a little bit about the object of certainty, so what those tasting notes are certain about, so to say. And finally, who is certain, which is also quite interesting. And then I will disagree with myself and it will fall into pieces. So let me show you a few tasting notes. I'm not going to read them, but I hope you will see that just about every clause in those tasting notes is the kind of non-modalized, non-qualified sentence in the third person singular. The certainty is striking, right? So this wine has a dark garnet color. The taste is pleasant, right? And this is very much the dominant way of describing wines. This is how wines are described in the tasting notes. You will see just about nothing else, but I will discuss it a little bit later. Non-syntactic things, for example, there is a website called Vinello, which is Europe-wide, and it's available in a number of languages. Probably because of the cost, they don't even use sentences or clauses, right? You've got tasting notes like blackberry, sour cherry, blackcurrant, vanilla cloves. That's it. Mango, peach, green apple, gooseberry, green grass, and mineral, right? Or the French-based website, Vin Millésime, you've got Robert Parker, 95 out of 100. Wine Spectator, 95 out of 100. This is also a kind of non-syntactic way of saying, you know, this wine is very good. This is the score it gets. There is no qualification. There is no hesitation. So, when we have this kind of description of wine, we could kind of delve in slightly more. It turns out that all three aspects of kind of wine of tasting notes or wine description is also rendered or conveyed in very much certain terms. So the wine, which I have already spoken about, right? The wine shows beautiful and deep garnet color. It is rich and voluptuous, but also the value judgment is actually rendered without any kind of hesitation or linguistically constructed hesitation. The wine has great complexity and pleasant sweet, with great balance and poise, right? I mean, you've got this the value judgment which is put into the presupposition of the statement, making it as certain as it gets. But even the reception actually of the wine is also rendered in much certain terms. You will enjoy it. Super quality for the price in a wine, make all white wine lovers weak at the knees. Best enjoyed, right? So we've got these three aspects of wine: the wine itself, the value judgment, the kind of the assessment of the wine, and then the reception of the wine, all rendered very much in certain terms. Now, it's important because when you actually read literature on wine, and for example, when you interview wine writers, and I have been actually interviewing wine writers over the last year or so, and I've interviewed about 120 people now. Absolutely, most of them will say that wine is actually about the kind of subjective enjoyment, that there is the kind of pleasure to be derived, which would suggest that this kind of certainty shouldn't have any place in tasting notes, and yet there we are. Now, what's interesting about tasting notes that they seem to be anonymous. And I will qualify that in a second. But when you actually read those things, the subjectivity of the person is very much bracketed out of the text. The only kind of subjectivity you will get is the reference to the nose. I mean, someone must have smelled the wine. The first sip, which means that someone must have actually must have put it into their mouth, just like, you know, the taste. And I deliberately put the we in the third tasting notes in, but do note that it is actually in the subordinate clause, right? It starts with this kind of certainty, has everything, and that is the superordinate clause, and only then do we get into this kind of slight subjectivity. But the subjectivity is actually not about the wine. It doesn't actually address it. It's the objective of the subjectivity is not the wine itself, but actually our needs. So it doesn't really undermine the kind of the pattern. So, but we have tasting notes where you have these the references to the organizations that do the assessing. Robert Parker is actually a very, very important figure in wine. He is the person who started actually scoring wines in the late 1980s, early 1990s in the United States. It took off. Everybody now scores wines, and then he has the website called Wine Advocate, and for which many wine critic works, and same is with Wine Spectator or James Suckling. So what we have here is actually this kind of institutional authorship, which is really not about authorship, but it is actually about, kind of say, you know, people from Robert Parker's organization actually have scored it like this, or Wine Spectator people have scored it like this. The kind of anonymity is preserved, only the kind of name is, you know, it's kind of like sponsored by Porsche, or, you know, it's kind of, it stood next to a Lamborghini, sort of thing. Now, so what we have here is the tasting notes are invariably rendered in very certain, unmodalized, unhesitant, unqualified way. The wine is, right? Whether it is syntactically done or whether it is not syntactically done, there is this unwavering certainty, and you immediately kind of wonder about why that is. Is the removal of any subjectivity kind of harking to scientificness? You know, when you actually think about a kind of wine critic, most of wine critics are actually not wine specialists. Most of those people are journalists. Some of them are simply writers, and some of them are who knows what, with an interest in wine, and they have gained some considerable experience, and some of them are absolutely wonderful wine tasters. But there is nothing to kind of say, I am a wonderful wine taster. I am a wonderful wine critic. So perhaps this kind of objectivity allows them to become kind of much more expert-like, if you like. And indeed, there is some literature on experts. Interestingly, there is actually no literature on expertise in wine. The three references that I put here are actually come from research on expertise and medicine. For example, Sarangi and Clark's very important study about how doctors in genetic counseling kind of delineate their expertise, and they claim expertise in one area and not claim or kind of disclaim their expertise in another area. In the same is in kind of Candlin study, Candlin offered a kind of review of these kind of studies. And perhaps after Candlin, we can say, well, in wine, there is nothing else we can do apart from the kind of objectivity of description, the certainty with which I speak. I am an expert because I speak kind of in a very, very certain way, and I speak in a very certain way because I am an expert. And these kind of tasting notes actually are as much about kind of identity concerns of the writers as they are about the wines themselves, because there is actually nothing that, especially with this kind of anonymized ways of writing. And here there is a kind of little digression I want to make. That one of the things that I'm thinking of doing, and I'm not certain whether I will, because it'll require quite a lot of effort. It would be actually interesting to compare tasting notes from people who have the title of the Master of Wine. There are about 420 of them in the world. This is a qualification which some people say it's so hard that it'll just cross your eyes and you will just walk on water after gaining it. Some will say, well, it's a kind of averagely leveled MA degree. I'm not going to offer my own judgment, but masters of wine are extremely well regarded, and it would be actually interesting to see whether they write differently from those who are not masters of wine. And I say that because I have a kind of feeling that this could be the case. So what we would have is that a kind of expertise in wine is constructed mostly through modality, through the kind of writer certainty. And it all kind of would work were it not for probably the most popular now website and application for dilettante wine lovers like me. I have an account here, which is called Vivino. And when you actually read kind of dilettantes accounts of wines on Vivino, they are actually uncannily similar to the accounts of experts. So you've got exactly the same kind of things, like dates and cinnamon. There is a little clove as well. It could have used a couple of hours in a decanter. Slate, blackberry, and white pepper, much leaner, etc. I mean, plus you've got these the scores out of 5, which are also very much underpinning the kind of certainty with which wine lovers speak. The question then, therefore, is, is it about kind of linguistically constructed wine expertise, or there is something else, that there is basically a kind of, as discourse travels from professional tasting notes onto Vivino, basically the kind of the amateur wine lovers on Vivino are just basically taking over the same kind of way of writing, diluting expertise. And then how do we know actually that who is the expert or at least an expert in wine? And I have no good answer to that, apart from perhaps kind of going back to Marshall McLuhan and say that actually it's the medium that is the message. If you actually publish it on a well-regarded website like say jansensrobinson.com or timatkin.com or places or in a magazine like Decanter or World of Fine Wine, then that actually makes you an expert, and it's not really linguistic. The expertise comes from the place. Say the medium is the message, but that actually kind of constitutes perhaps problems for us, the consumers, because we actually don't know, and this kind of ambiguity in wine description is perhaps something that we need to live with, or we need to pay up to the subscription service. And on this unhappy note, thank you for listening. If you would like to contact me, here are my contact details, and thank you very much. I'd be delighted to answer any questions about wine communication, not about wine. Thank you. Thank you. Michael, we can't hear you. You know that.
Okay, I was saying thank you, and I'm just activated the microphones and cameras for everyone. So if you want to put your hand up to ask a question, please do while I am stopping the recording.